Hi, sociologists. This is Mrs. T, and I am coming to you from home this week because most of you have already seen a message from me on a blackboard that said I had to stay home because my father has to go into hospice. So I'm home for a little while with him, and so I'm going to make some videos like this for you for the time that I have to be out. And then if I have to be out any longer or additional days intermittently moving forward, I've got another setup where I'll use a camera and a whiteboard that I have at my house. Last semester, I called it my COVID classroom because we were forced out of the classroom so abruptly. So I got myself a whiteboard so I could just kind of have fake class for everybody between the time we had to close down and the end of the semester. So anyway, if we have to be out much more than just today, I'm going to set that up again for you so that you'll have, you won't have to be deprived of as close to a classroom experience as possible. So for now, it's just my voice and this Word document that I'm going to kind of use as a whiteboard behind me. And today we are going to talk about sociobiology versus sociology and the socialization process. Okay, so this comes from chapter 3, and this will conclude our last topic that we're going to spend class time on. So in this short video, I'm going to mention some stuff about how sociobiology is kind of a counter argument or provides a different point of view over sociology that I've been talking to you about so much so far. And kind of gives a different way of thinking about our behavior and our socialization process. So let me write this phrase on the board here because I think you might be familiar with the concept of nature versus nurture. Maybe you've heard that argument before. Since it's got the word versus in here, there's like an argument going on, right? And this phrase nature refers to our DNA, right? It refers to DNA, whereas nurture refers to our social environment and the way in which we interact with people around us. Nature also would deal with like biochemistry and stuff like that of our bodies and our physical skeletons and stuff like that, whereas nurture involves the life experience and interaction with others. I'm gonna have to try to type better since I'm doing this way. So anyway, nurture is life experience, and let's see, what else did I say? Oh yes, the interaction that we have with others. So you can probably see in just these key words that I've put on the board here so far, you can probably see that this nurture side is more what sociologists would lean toward when we're trying to explain the socialization process. So when we explain this process, of course, you've already got in your notes that it's a lifelong learning process, but the learning process is something that happens through life experience and through interaction. And sometimes it's an intentional learning process. Sometimes it's just accidental. We learn from observations of people that we're around every single day. And we learn throughout our lives. We learn things like our gender roles. We learn things like our language. We learn things like how to interpret symbols and how to behave and what's appropriate or acceptable for our particular social group. So we focused a lot on that so far, but there are some good arguments that sociobiology introduces because, as we've said in class before, human beings are animals, and so human beings have some of the same natural urges and necessities that any other animal has. We have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to drink, we have to pee, we have to poop, we have to do all of those things the same as anybody's dog or kitty cat has to do. And sociobiologists argue that there are also other aspects of behavior, that of human behavior in general, that are guided, influenced, do you want to use that word? Guided, influenced at least through DNA, through biochemistry, through anatomy, physiology, all of those things. So in other words, well, here's a drastic argument. I wish I could think of another one off the top of my head to tell you, but I'll use an argument for a very famous biologist. His name is Richard Dawson. I believe I'm spelling his name correctly, with an N. Anyway, he is a biologist, and he argues that the reason why males are most often the creatures in the human animal, the sex of the human animal who engages in rape activity, that is a biological thing that comes with maleness in human animals because of survival of the fittest, because of the need to reproduce, to keep the species moving forward. Now, that's a drastic example, granted, that I came up with off the top of my head there, but there are biologists who suggest that the biology part of being a human controls or greatly influences the social behavior of those human beings, regardless of whether the social environment or the life experience interaction trained them not to do certain things or tried to steer them toward certain things, that there are certain drives in our nature in order to point us toward certain behaviors is, in general, the argument. Now, this is an argument that has gone on for long time. I don't see an end in sight anytime soon when this nature versus nurture debate will be settled once and for all. Gender roles, for instance, and gender identity is one of the major arguments that surrounds the nature versus nurture debate these days in the media and in our social worlds. So I don't see any time in the future when this is going to be solved. But it's important for us to, as sociologists who lean more toward the socialization process as being the most important influencer of human social behavior, it's very, very important for us to study the opposite point of view. So that we better understand, so that we can come at our point of view from a holistic approach, trying to understand all aspects of it from all angles we can approach it. If we don't understand the opposition's point of view, then we are less able to argue in favor of our own point of view, essentially. So we have to study sociobiology also. And in particular, there is a section in Chapter 3, I believe it's the very first part of Chapter 3, that talks about a phenomenon called feral children. Now, feral means wild. I learned this word when I was a child because we had a barn and there were some cats that showed up in that barn and decided that they were going to live there. And I remember my dad saying that calling them feral cats, because they weren't like the sweet little ones that you could say, here, kitty, kitty, and they would, purr and let you pet them or anything. They wanted to kill you if you got close to them. So they were untamed, essentially, is what feral means. So in the case of feral children, this is a terrible situation, having a human child who has been neglected or abandoned to the point where they have not had a social environment to engage them through life experience and interaction. Remember, that's how socialization takes place. So feral children, literal translation is wild or untamed. If you want to think of untamed as not having gone through a socialization process in the same ways that we have described in class, the way it works, then feral children are a very unfortunate example that we can look at to help us understand the relationship between nature and nurture in our social behavior overall. Okay. So for instance, what do I mean by feral child, or why is this a good example? There is the name of a feral child who is quite famous in the United States. Her name is Genie, and I believe she's still alive and lives in Texas someplace. But there's a picture of her in your textbook at the beginning of chapter 3. She was a victim of terrible, horrible neglect. She was born unexpectedly, very late in life, to a couple who kind of lived like a hermit, if I remember correctly. They lived kind of like hermits. And Genie, nobody even knew Genie existed. Genie is not her birth name. She didn't have a birth certificate. She wasn't registered as existing anywhere, so nobody ever checked up on her. And accidentally, one day, a social worker doing a welfare check on the parents discovered that Genie existed. And she had been terribly abused, probably punished if she made a sound or a whimper or anything, so she never learned to speak. She was 14 when she was discovered. She had never learned the customs, the rituals that you and I learn in potty training. She had never learned that. She had never learned how to hold herself in a posture that appears to match the posture that you and I have when we're walking down the street or walking back and forth between classes. She didn't know how to hold her body. She didn't know how to speak. She didn't have any kind of reference from social experience, from life experience, to give her the knowledge she needed to exist as a human being. She looked like a human being, and as far as researchers could tell, she was born with a perfect brain, like your perfect brain, and she just had been neglected and had not gone through the life experience necessary for brain formation. So by the time she was 14, we can look at psychology to tell us that we need a lot of stimuli in our experience in order for our brains to develop those neuroconnectors. And she had not had that those stimuli, and therefore she had not had that brain development. And there is a time in the physical body, in your physical development, when that advanced brain development cannot take place thoroughly after a certain point. And that's when she was rescued, so to speak. So there is a video on YouTube. I believe it's in my Sociology playlist, one of the playlists that I have on the YouTube channel. But if not, there is a Nova documentary called Genie, the Wild Child, that you might want to watch. It's terribly fascinating. I say terrible because it's such a crime that the experiences she had in her life have happened to her. But when these experiences like this do happen to a child and others find out about it, it gives us a unique opportunity to study that person's behavior to see if there happens to be anything in our DNA that, even though we have been deprived of a social environment like typical people have, does our DNA take over and make us behave in any kind of recognizable human way? So these wild children, there's several other examples. You can read about them in your textbook and look them up online, give us data that we can use to examine that question. I sincerely wish we didn't have that data to examine that question, because I wish that no one suffered from abandonment or neglect to the point where this kind of thing happens. But unfortunately, reality is that it does happen. And so it gives us an opportunity for research in biology and psychology, and definitely in sociology. So this is going to be the end of this short video, and I'm going to post one or two more to close out week 4 requirements for your reaction paper and quiz questions and stuff like that. So thank you for your attention. I will see you, or you'll hear me anyways, in the next video. Bye for now.